9:16 here on the morning show with Jeff and Will on AM 1700 WRCR Haverstraw, WRCR.com. Joining us now, as she does every Monday, except for next Monday because it'll be Memorial Day, it's Tina Traster of the Rockland County Business Journal. Good morning, Tina.
Good morning, Rockland County. How is everybody today?
We're doing well today. How are you?
I am good. So much to talk about today.
Really? Like what?
Okay, so it is not news that the highest court, the New York Court of Appeals, upheld the lower court's decision to overturn the Rockland County Supreme Court's decision, and therefore term limits are done in Clarkstown. George Holman is free to run again for supervisor. Don't want to linger on this too much, but I do want to make a point that is interesting about all of this. So back in 2014, I guess the town of Clarkstown didn't get very comprehensive legal advice, because what went missing was and what this entire this entire drama unveiled or revealed is that what was needed at the time when they decided to enact term limits unanimously was that it needed a public referendum. It needed the voters to say, yes, we want this. Clarkstown, we want this. With the absence of that, it left the law in limbo. And when Supervisor Holman wanted to run again after 8 years, and recognized that he was term limited, or so he thought, I guess he found a better lawyer who found the loophole that the law had never really been cemented because of a lack of a public referendum. The interesting thing that I want to point out is back in November, when the town council started to discuss trying to itself repeal its term limits law, well, the funny thing is that technically speaking, there was nothing to repeal because, as I just said, this law was never truly enacted. However, the discussion that came up at one of those meetings, and I was there, and I remember this, and I have to credit Councilman Don Franchino for this, is Don Franchino had said, let's put this up to a public referendum. And I would say that now, looking back after everything, all of these court decisions, all of this discussion, I would say that Clarkstown still deserves to have a public referendum on this issue of term limits, because there's been a presumption that that is what the town has. I don't know whether it would grandfather them going backwards if the public were to vote in favor of term limits, or whether the clock would restart after a vote. But either way, I do want to say that I think that there are many, many people who are in favor of term limits. There are many people who were happy to know that law was in place over these 8 years. And the truth is that in the spirit of things, a public referendum was necessary back then. And even though Holman has prevailed all the way up through the Court of Appeals, I still believe that a public referendum on this issue would be the right thing to do. So I don't know if that will get any traction. I don't know whether the good citizens of Clarkstown will bring that forward to their council members. I don't know whether this will rise up to be an issue or a discussion. But in writing this, what I believe will be the final story on this issue, at least from the legal perspective, I think that it really did leave that hole, and I think that a public referendum is still in order on this issue. So we will leave that for the good folks of Rockland County to ponder, and it's also a lesson to any other municipality that wants to think about term limits. Hold a public referendum so that you do not find yourself, for 6 months watching this sort of wrangling. There's been collateral damage from this in terms of at least 2 public officials in Clarkstown who believe that term limits were in place and will not be running for this reason. Namely,
Can they change their minds though? No.
oh no, it's too late. It's too late. They haven't collected signatures. They're not on the ballot.
Right.
No, it's too late. So a lot has. It's a domino thing. One thing sets off another, and as every decision, every action creates a reaction, or however that phrase goes. So anyway, lesson out there. I hope it's not in vain. I still hope that the people of Clarkstown may have a chance to see through the enactment of a law that they presume that they've had the last 8 years, and any other municipality thinking about term limits has also kind of been put on notice that the Court of Appeals has spoken in a unanimous 7-0 decision that the deficit here was that the law was never truly enacted. And just one last commentary on the legal side. When Justice Amy Puerto made her decisions and doubled down on them twice over, she was really reinforcing her decision that this had run the statute of limitations. But she had never decided on the issue itself. And that's why it took going to the Court of Appeals and then up to the state to ultimately locate, what the issue really was around this. And what it really boiled down to was that Clarkstown needed a referendum. The voters needed to speak on it. Voters' rights are, they're very precious, and so that's what all of this has revealed. I mean, it's been kind of an interesting experience if you're kind of wonky and you're interested in this sort of thing. But like I just said before, it's actually had real effects in terms of time squandered. Like George Homan will be primaried by Lawrence Garvey simply because he's on the ballot. That would never have been that's not what they wanted.
Do you think that'll remain that way, or do you think Lawrence Garvey will say, you know what, I really didn't want to be supervisor anyway? Or does he say, you know what, I really do want to be supervisor, tack with this, I'm running. I mean, where do you think this ends up?
No, I think where it ends up is he lays low, his name's on the ballot, but everybody, in the Republican Party who understands, why he was there in the first place, casts their vote for Homan. He'll be challenged by Justin Sweet, who quit his job as clerk because he thought that he was term limited, and now in fact retrospectively we see he wasn't.
And I'm sure he's not going to keep that a secret as an issue when it comes to every public appearance he makes.
Yeah. I mean, this really was a very messy ordeal. But the thing is, I can't seem to stop talking about this because
I can't either.
I know. Well, it is very fascinating. But I want to say that when Mr. Homan discovered this hole, the fact that it was when he originally started to say it was defective, and he understood that it was because there hadn't been a public referendum. If he had put his own desire for power aside, the right thing to have done at that point was to get a referendum on the ballot for November so that this law could be promulgated correctly once and for all. But that's not what he did. What he did was he saw the opportunity to figure out a way to keep running, and he used that, and he used it all the way up to the Court of Appeals. But the truth is that if he had put his own interests aside, what he would have seen that for the sake of the town, the discussion really always should have been about, do we hold the referendum, and if we hold the referendum as in a special election or in November, does it mean that it grandfathers backwards to 2014, or does the clock start up again? And the funny thing about that is, probably because this is such a unique situation, that would have maybe possibly become the subject of more legal contemplation, and we would have had to see whether it had dated back or moved forward in time. But without now, and here's another question that I don't have the answer to, which is, can the voters of Clarkstown initiate a permissive referendum to force the town to vote on term limits at this point? Because the law is still in limbo. In other words, it's still on the books. I remember one of the New York Court of Appeals judges said, well, it's a law, but it's inoperative. So it's still there, waiting to be, kicked in. And so there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of gray space around this, and I think that lawyers could sit down and have a long discussion about this, and should. So, any more thoughts on this?
Well, listen, as far as I can tell, the voters will have their say on it in some way. There are going to be voters who are going to say, hey, George, you campaigned against this for term limits 8 years ago, and now all of a sudden you're against it, and we're going to hold that against you. Or there are going to be plenty of voters who say, you know what, we like what George is doing for the town, we want him again anyway. So
we've had some of those calls, the latter.
We've had
station.
Yeah,
so.
Right. So I'm sure they're both out there, and they'll have their say one way or another. Assuming he does run, because it sounds like he is, but he kind of left the door open for an official announcement some point soon. But it sounds like he's running anyway.
Yes, I would be willing to to sell all the goats on the farm to say I'm sure he's running. He did not do all of this, just in vain.
Well, I don't know how many goats you have on your farm, but it sounds like you might have a bunch that you're willing to part with, or not. We'll see. Given that you are the Rockland County Business Journal, what's going on business-wise in the county? And you've got about 2 minutes left.
We have 2 minutes. Well, okay, I'm just going to kind of give an overview on. I had an interesting week last week, and I met with separately and just for FaceTime. I met with somebody, people who represent the Hudson Valley Economic Development Corporation. I met with someone from the Jewish Federation, and I met with some people from the Boulders. All of these people being, at the sort of the top rungs and decision makers and influencers for these totally, separate entities. And the strange thing about all of these meetings was that the conversation seemed to wind back to the same place when it came to all three conversations. And I think it's worth putting it out there, and I actually intend to do an editorial piece about this when I kind of boil down my thoughts more specifically on this. But what each of these people were really talking about was what I would call the silo effect, which is the idea of the entities of the county operating without enough connectivity to other organizations and other people, and a lack of fluidity. Even in a county as small as this, it seems that there's work to be done to open the lines of communication, to work for the betterment of the county as a whole, to get out of our silos and try to understand people who we don't necessarily understand, or to let go of negative impressions that we have of an institution, or for that institution, like the Boulders, to become more integrated into the community. So I know this sounds a little TED Talkish and a little kind of fluffy, but it was very striking to me how the conversations, in essence, really were about the same thing, about a frustration of not feeling wholly connected enough.
And unfortunately, Tina, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there because we've got another show coming up at 9:30.
Okay, just want to remind people that we're doing our next Meet the Editor on June 7th it's a Wednesday morning, 8:30 at Roasted.
Excellent, very good. rcbizjournal.com is the website. Thank you, Tina. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks because we're off for Memorial Day next week.
Have a great holiday.
Thanks, you too.